Soundgarden's story begins in a rain-soaked city far from the spotlight, where basement jams and battered amplifiers echo in the twilight. Before the world knew the sound of Seattle, a handful of restless musicians fused thunderous riffs, hypnotic rhythms, and haunting vocals into something the world had never heard. Chris Cornell's voice soared like a siren above Kim Thayil's wild guitar shapes, forging a sound as primal as the Pacific Northwest itself. Their journey is far more than fame or fortune. It's about taking risks that shattered conventions and forging an identity that was uncompromising and deeply personal. Soundgarden didn't just ride the wave of grunge, they helped shape and destroy it, crafting masterpieces that balance chaos with subtle beauty, innovation with nostalgia. Today, because you guys requested it, and because the band's being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this weekend, this is the saga of four outsiders who changed music, endured heartbreak, and found salvation in their art. Before we get started, be sure to hit the bell notification icon and put all notifications on. I hear from a lot of my subscribers that they don't even get notifications when I post my videos. The story of Soundgarden begins with guitarist Kim Thayil and bassist Hiro Yamamoto, who were originally from the Chicago area. It all kicked off in the early 80s. Motivated to pursue further education in a progressive setting, they aimed for Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. However, after moving to Olympia, they struggled to find jobs and soon became drawn to the vibrant Seattle music scene, a city where Kim had briefly even lived as a child. Ultimately, the pair settled in Seattle, with Kim enrolling in the University of Washington, where he would later complete a philosophy degree. Hiro didn't know how to play bass yet, but he did know how to play mandolin. It was only when they moved to Seattle that Kim, who played bass, showed Hiro how to play it too. It wasn't long before their paths converged with a young adult named Chris Cornell, whose powerful voice soon became synonymous with Soundgarden. Chris at the time came across as a quiet, clean-cut figure, hardly the image of an imposing future rock icon, but his vocal talent was undeniable from their earliest collaborations. Before there was Soundgarden, there existed another band called the Shemps, which was founded by Kim's roommate, a guitarist named Matt Dentino. Hiro was in the band too. He was playing bass, but Kim wasn't in the group yet. The Shemps were a bar cover band, so they weren't really going places. Matt Dentino had put an ad in a local paper looking for a singer, and Chris Cornell responded to it. Chris was 19 at the time, and he was also a really good drummer. The song that Chris sang for his audition was White Wedding by Billy Idol. Shortly after Chris joined, though, Hiro ended up quitting the group and Kim took his place. Kim remembered meeting Chris for the first time, telling Rolling Stone, "My impression was that he was some guy who just got out of the Navy or something. He had real short hair and was dressed real slick. He had a great voice, even though we were doing material." The Shemps material was mostly cover tunes by groups and artists like The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, and Buddy Holly. In fact, the group's founder, Matt, was obsessed with dead people, and the only original song they wrote was a track called Marilyn Monroe. Their first gig took place at Morningstar Cafe, which was a 10-foot by 15-foot cement block. But at that gig was drummer Matt Cameron, who was blown away by Chris's singing. Another musician Chris and Kim soon became friends with was a guitarist in a hardcore group called March of Crimes. That guitarist was named Ben Shepherd. Matt Cameron, meanwhile, was in a group called Feedback, which eventually morphed into the iconic Seattle band Skin Yard. The Shemps didn't last for very long, falling apart soon after, as its founder Matt had a spiritual awakening, believing he needed to leave behind all the partying, drinking, and drugs he was involved with at the time. He soon became a minister of music in different churches. By the time the Shemps broke up, Chris was now living with Hiro, and since Chris played drums, he started jamming with his roommate, telling Rolling Stone, "I was a drummer and he was a bass player, so it was sort of like the law that we had to start a band." They invited a number of guitar players, with Kim eventually joining them. Chris didn't even know Kim played guitar, only thinking he was a bassist. And Kim didn't want to commit to the group just yet. He was going to school, he had a girlfriend, and he was working at the Native American Cultural Center. But Kim eventually lost his job and was confronted by the other members to commit or not, and he decided to finally join them, rehearsing with them up to 3 days a week. The trio at the time was mostly coming up with instrumental tunes, and the band called themselves Soundgarden, a name that came from the wind channeling art installation in Seattle's Magnuson Park called a Soundgarden. Soon afterwards, they started adding lyrics to their instrumentals, and they had about 6 songs, half of which Hiro sang on, and the other half Chris sang on. Then 2 months later, they had a 4-track cassette of 15 songs that they called the First 15. A few months after that, the trio played their first gig, opening for a New York act called Three Teens Kill Four. They got some buzz just from that gig, and that resulted in them getting a second gig opening for both the Melvins and Husker Du. Soon enough, word was spreading around Seattle about this trio called Soundgarden. Soundgarden in the early days was described as Bauhaus meets Aerosmith, while another comparison they frequently got was to Led Zeppelin. At first, Chris was singing and drumming, but the band was soon at a crossroads. The drumming and singing was taking its toll on Chris. What may surprise you is that Kim admitted to Greg Prato that him and Hiro originally thought Chris was more valuable to them as a drummer than a singer. As Kim saw it, Chris and Hiro were a really tight rhythm section, and they didn't know that Chris could be an imposing frontman because he was so reserved. But in 1985, they brought in Scott Sundquist on drums, which freed up Chris to step out front and unleash his incredible voice. The band started playing gigs at local spots like Top of the Court, and the chemistry between the members really started to click. The Seattle music scene back then was a different beast. It was less of a competition and more of a community, with bands constantly supporting each other. This spirit was a huge part of Soundgarden's early growth. Sub Pop Records, co-founded by Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman, was at the heart of it all. Bruce Pavitt was a friend of Kim's and Hiro's, and the label became instrumental in getting local bands like Soundgarden heard nationally. The city was buzzing with groups like Green River, the Melvins, and later Mudhoney, who were all shaping the sound of so-called grunge music. Instead of fancy clubs, the scene thrived in coffee shops and venues like the Central Tavern and Guerrilla Gardens, creating a space where musicians could experiment and collaborate. Chris Cornell often spoke about how the sense of community made Seattle feel different from anywhere else. 1986 brought another key lineup change for the group when Matt Cameron, formerly of Skinyard, took over on drums. Sundquist at the time had a wife and kids and left the group. This is the lineup that many fans considered to be the classic version of the band. Matt's arrival brought a new level of power and precision, pushing their sound from a more psychedelic, jam-heavy style to something heavier and more focused. Their future producer, Jack Endino, told Greg Prato, after they got Matt in the band, they became more focused and narrowed down to, we're going to play these big rock riffs. As Kim revealed, the lineup of the band was influenced by the likes of Killing Joke, Birthday Party, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Led Zeppelin, and Butthole Surfers. Their first official recordings landed on the Deep Six compilation in 1986, which was a showcase of Seattle's raw emerging talent. And it was the Deep Six disc that resulted in major labels taking note of Seattle and scouting the city, looking for talent to sign. Soundgarden was starting to get a lot of interest from labels, and they needed someone to help book tours, answer phones, and someone who might know a good lawyer or accountant, so that's when Susan Silver became involved, and she started dating Chris Cornell not long after. The band signed with local label Sub Pop and released 2 EPs, Screaming Life in 1987 and Fop in 1988.
Hi, we're Mick Jagger, here to tell you about the new Soundgarden Screaming Life EP on Sub Pop Records. This record rocks. It comes complete with orange vinyl and a live-action cover, and it's available at your favorite record store. Buy this disc, but exercise extreme caution. Do not play on or around. Do not look at it sideways. Do not look through the hole. Do not attempt...
Both were produced by Jack Endino and captured the band's raw live energy. Major label scouts started to court the band, but Soundgarden at the time wanted to stay as an indie group, signing with Los Angeles outfit SST Records, which was home to several post-punk groups the members were fans of. The band felt like signing to a major label at this point in their career would have halted their momentum, because they would have spent months negotiating a contract, then waiting to find a producer, and then recording their next album. In 1988, they issued their debut LP, Ultra Mega OK. It was on this album that their unique blend of punk, metal, and psychedelia really started to solidify, with Chris's soaring vocals and Kim's mind-bending guitar riffs leading the charge. It was following the album's release, Soundgarden became the first of the so-called grunge bands from Seattle to nab a major recording contract, signing with A&M Records. But with this career change also came some complications. and another lineup change. While they were getting ready to record what would become Louder Than Love, bassist Hiro Yamamoto felt uneasy about the level of commitment required from both a promotion and touring side when signed to a major label. After the album was finished, he made the tough call to leave the group and go back to college to study sciences. The move from an indie label to a major one was a huge hurdle even for the other members. Suddenly, they had to think about record sales and radio play without losing their artistic integrity that got them there. It was a balancing act, but the band's work ethic and commitment to their vision kept them pushing forward. After touring for Ultra Mega OK, Soundgarden's major label debut, Louder Than Love, was recorded with producer Terry Date at Seattle's London Bridge Studios. The album had a heavier and more polished sound, packed with complex rhythms and odd time signatures that were becoming their trademark. Songs like Ugly Truth, Hands All Over, and Loud Love showed a band that had seriously leveled up. Louder Than Love made history as the first so-called grunge record to hit the Billboard 200, climbing to number 108 and proving that the Seattle sound was starting to catch on nationally. As for replacing Hiro, the band briefly considered their friend Ben Shepherd, but he wasn't well versed in the band's catalog at the time, so they enlisted former Nirvana guitarist Jason Everman. But his personality didn't jive with the members on the road, and he was soon fired by the band by the end of the touring cycle for the record. Jason, interestingly enough, quit music, became a Green Beret, and was deployed overseas after 9/11. He even later appeared on tall and funny comedian Joe Rogan's podcast. With Jason out of the picture, the band was in a crunch, and they were soon hit by a personal loss in 1990. Chris Cornell's close personal friend and former roommate, Mother Love Bones Andy Wood, died due to a drug overdose. Kim told Rolling Stone, "When Andy died, I started thinking how there was nobody like him." And Chris was thinking this. "I remember we were drinking and Chris goes, I've been thinking about Ben Shepherd a lot because there's something in his spirit that Andy had. We said, Ben is that kind of person. He's just one. There's just sort of one Ben. And we thought, Jesus, it just makes sense to honor that kind of talent. Okay, let's get Ben." Bassist Ben Shepherd joined Soundgarden in 1990. The band credited the bassist with helping them write better songs due to his musical acumen. Badmotorfinger saw a changing dynamic in how the band wrote songs. Now, before, songs often grew out of rehearsal room jams, but for Badmotorfinger, frontman Chris Cornell started showing up with fully formed demos he'd recorded at home. This let them build more intricate songs from the ground up, with everyone deconstructing and rebuilding the ideas together. It became a much more collaborative space where every single member was key to the final sound. Their new bassist Ben Shepherd radiated a classic punk and post-punk presence, taking inspiration from Black Flag and Joy Division. Yet the way he spoke, softly with a slight drawl and occasional deep observations, made him seem like a wise storyteller you might encounter at a racetrack or behind a pawn shop counter. As drummer Matt Cameron put it, Shepherd had the soul of a true artist, bringing a genuinely unique approach to everything he did. Chris Cornell added to Kerrang, he's got this real out-of-hand playing style like Captain Beefheart playing hardcore, and this real frantic way of playing parts and writing songs. He'll just sit down and play really fast and intense and strange. He's really fresh and creative. Ben contributed the music for epics like Slaves and Bulldozers, Jesus Christ Pose, and the entire song Somewhere and Face Pollution. The band soon retreated to Avast Studios, which belonged to their soundman Stuart Hollerman, where they rehearsed songs for their new album. The band hooked up once again with producer Terry Date, who had worked on Louder Than Love. The band trusted him, and Chris explained that they didn't want the pressure of finding a new producer, which gave them the freedom to get weird. They weren't trying to make a polished, radio-friendly record. They were trying to capture the wild, aggressive energy of their live shows. The producer highlighted the differences between Hiro Yamamoto and Ben Shepherd, telling Greg Prado, different dynamic, two totally different personalities. Ben carries a lot more fire, where Hiro was a lot more cerebral. It didn't change the band musically that much, but Ben brings in his own songs, a different style of songs. But before Soundgarden hit the studio, the members had one final thing to do. During November and December of 1990, members of several Seattle bands joined forces to record Temple of the Dog, an album honoring Andy Wood. The project brought together Matt Cameron and Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. Cornell wrote most of the songs alongside Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament from Mother Love Bone, and they were joined by Mike McCready and Eddie Vedder, who would soon form Pearl Jam with Gossard and Ament. In the spring of 1991, Soundgarden walked into Studio D in Sausalito, California. The studio was suggested to the band by their friends in Faith No More. Terry Date remarked how a lot of people thought that Louder Than Love was too smooth sounding, and the band instead wanted a rougher direction, a rougher edge on their upcoming record. Date and the music Soundgarden had made up until this point wasn't getting a lot of radio play, and both parties never really took it that seriously, so it gave them a lot more freedom to explore. The producer remarked, "I had no expectations. I knew it was a good record." You can hear that freedom all over the album Badmotorfinger. It's a maze of sonic experiments. The band dove headfirst into bizarre alternate tunings, which would become their signature. On Rusty Cage, Chris Cornell dropped the low E string to B, which allowed for the slidey, fast-paced riff that defines the song. Then on Mind Riot, they did something even crazier, tuning every string to a different version of E, creating a droning, hypnotic vortex of sound. But it wasn't just the tunings. The album is famous for its odd time signatures. Outshine stumbles forward in a 7/4 meter, while Face Pollution thrashes around in 9/8. According to Kim, this wasn't some nerdy attempt for them to be progressive. It was the natural result of them trying to get the quirkiness out of things. Matt Cameron was the powerhouse who made it all work with his drumming, navigating the complex rhythms with a rare combination of power and precision. And then there was Chris Cornell's voice. It was an absolute force of nature, able to shift from a soulful whisper to a jet engine scream in the blink of an eye. His voice was so powerful that during recording, he often had to sing in the control room with Terry Date just to keep his vocals from bleeding into the drum mics. As for the lyrical themes on the record, Thayil admitted, "It's like reading a novel about a man's conflict with himself and society, or the government, or his family, or the economy, or anything." Looking back at the final result, Matt Cameron reflected to Greg Prado, Badmotorfinger was a lot darker sounding. We got a heavier guitar sound and we used Ron St. Germain to mix it. He did a lot of records we liked. Eye Against Eye by Bad Brains, so he mixed the drums dry and the bass is really loud. It was a cool sound. It was really different from Louder Than Love. The album kicks off with Rusty Cage. Chris imagined it as a sort of hillbilly Black Sabbath crossover, an idea born from feeling pent up on tour. The song's iconic status was later launched into another stratosphere when it was covered by Johnny Cash.
I'm gonna break my rusty cage and run. Break my rusty cage and run.
Chris admitted he initially thought that the idea was kind of baffling and thought it was a stupid idea, but Cash's haunting version stripped the song down to its lyrical soul, earning Chris Cornell's deep admiration. He later joked it was the first time he'd ever received compliments for his lyrics. But no song captured the band's aggressive spirit quite like the lead single Jesus Christ Pose, a blistering all-hands-on-deck composition. It was a takedown of public figures who exploit martyr imagery, and in a 1992 interview, Chris clarified it's pretty much a song that is non-religious, but expressing being irritated by seeing that. The frenetic music video filled with religious imagery was promptly banned by MTV after complaints from viewers, and the band, believe it or not, even received death threats while touring in the UK. Chris admitted to the Associated Press in 1992 that the band's fan club was inundated with letters from fans who claimed their parents were upset with the video. He added to the AP, "I think most people are afraid of it because of the title." He went on to say that people who are often offended by art don't often look past the surface, adding, "It isn't so much religious as it is being annoyed with the exploitation of symbols that are held sacred, especially that one referring to the cross." He added that the track Holy Water had more to do with religion than Jesus Christ Pose, but people didn't seem to get upset with that song. Holy Water takes aim at people trying to convince others they know what's best for them. Despite it being a commercial dud in the US and not charting, the controversy cemented Jesus Christ Pose's legendary status. Even though it didn't chart in the States, it did peak at number 30 in the UK. The band was told by their label that Outshine was going to be the follow-up single. Kim recalled to Greg Prado that he was surprised by the choice. He thought Somewhere or Mind Riot would have been issued first, but at the same time, he admitted he wasn't an avid radio listener. Outshine became a self-deprecating anthem. Its massive riff powering Chris's unforgettable line, "I'm looking California and feeling Minnesota." Chris said the song was about swinging from periods of extreme confidence to plummeting in the opposite direction. Outshine became the band's biggest song to date in the States, peaking at number 45 on the mainstream rock tracks chart and number 50 in the UK. Susan Silver, Chris Cornell's then wife and Soundgarden's manager, reflected on how Outshine was a game changer, telling Greg Prado that was a symbol of the things changing in the industry and the dedication of A&M to really help break Soundgarden. Outshined at a label with less support, maybe it wouldn't have gotten the sort of radio play because the radio promotion staff wouldn't have been as focused on it. But believe it or not, the band members hated the music video for the song. Despite earning MTV's Buzzbin seal of approval, both Kim and Chris expressed disdain for it. Chris remembered, "Matt Mahern does people on the street social underbelly crap, but it's pretend underbelly. The clip was in the MTV Buzzbin for a few weeks and then it fell off. About 2 months later, he sent us the real cut and it was fantastic. He kind of winged it. He was too busy with Metallica." Mahern had directed the video for Metallica's The Unforgiven at the time. Now, Kim added how Outshined was a Buzzbin clip. Smells Like Teen Spirit and Pearl Jam's Alive were also in the Buzzbin around this time. And at the end of the day, those two clips outshined. Rusty Cage was issued as the third single, but much like Jesus Christ Pose, it didn't chart in the States, but it did peak at number 41 in the UK. The album's genius goes way beyond the singles, though. Slaves and Bulldozers, co-written by Chris and Ben, is a slow-grinding epic that became a monster during their live shows. Searching with My Good Eye Closed is a psychedelic trip into the darkness, and A Room 1,000 Years Wide even throws in a wailing saxophone, proving the band was willing to try anything. Though initially overshadowed by its Seattle peers, the attention of the scene helped propel Badmotorfinger to go gold a few years after its release. Driven by the heavy MTV and radio play for Outshined and Rusty Cage, the album peaked at number 39 on the Billboard 200 by early 1992, and it was later certified double platinum by 1996. This success, which also included a Grammy nomination for Best Metal Performance, was achieved without watering down their vision one bit. Relentless touring, including a spot on the 1992 Lollapalooza tour, built a massive dedicated fan base, and the band got the opportunity of a lifetime, an opening slot across America and Europe for Guns N' Roses. Frontman Axl Rose admitted to Rolling Stone around 1990 that he was a massive fan of the band, singling out Chris Cornell's singing style.
You know, Chris, I read in an interview from Axl Rose that he said that he thinks you're like the best vocalist out there.
Wow.
Did you read? Are you friends with those guys, or?
We met him. We met Axl.
Uh-huh.
He came to a couple of our shows.
Because I know he's a big fan of yours.
Soundgarden's manager, Susan Silver, remembered getting the call with the offer to open for Guns N' Roses and being so excited to tell the band. She went to the studio to tell the band the news. She brought some t-shirt designs in a box as well, and she told the members that they were offered the opening slot for Guns N' Roses. And then there was dead silence. No one said anything. Kim broke the silence asking, "What's in the box?" But the members admitted that the crew on the Guns N' Roses tour were very hospitable to them and very accommodating, despite the band being dubbed Frowngarden by the members of Guns N' Roses. While the hospitality on the tour was great, the crowds left the band with mixed feelings. Chris told Raw Magazine in 1993, "It wasn't a whole lot of fun going out in front of 40,000 people for 35 minutes every day. Most of them hadn't heard our songs and didn't care about them. It was a bizarre thing." However, when Outshine became successful, it left the band with a similar feeling. Despite crowds reacting positively to the song during opening sets for GNR, Ben Shepherd admitted this reaction led him to resent the song, feeling it became popular more for its video than what it actually represents musically. Chris echoed the sentiment, pointing out that he was frustrated of being defined by a single heavily promoted track. While the band always believed they had more to offer than just the hits, it was often these few widely recognized songs that audiences latched onto, even as more personal or innovative material sometimes flew under the radar. The decision to tour with Guns N' Roses resulted in Soundgarden getting some flack from their sub-pop and punk rock as well as indie peers. Kim told Greg Prado they thought Soundgarden was on the fence, kind of punk rock, kind of metal, but now they're touring with Guns N' Roses. They fell into the side of that fence. It's like, no, we didn't. At that time, who were we supposed to tour with? He also went on to add how a lot of the cities they toured with Guns N' Roses in, they likely would have had trouble selling tickets if they were headlining shows themselves. But as Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden blew up, there was also a heavy focus on the Seattle music scene, something that annoyed Soundgarden. Matt Cameron in particular announced how ridiculous the public's perception was, admitting there's this blind acceptance for any band from Seattle. Worse, the national press did a pretty lousy job of documenting the scene's history, with the drummer adding, "The only time I get real miffed is when people think of all the Seattle bands out of chronological order. We were one of the first ones to sign a major label deal, to come out of that amazingly fertile scene that peaked around 1986, 1987, and we were kind of the guinea pigs for what was going to happen with a lot of other bands. And here we are, we're still doing it, but they think that Nirvana is the first band from Seattle." Now, despite the members' mixed emotions about their newfound success and the public's perception of them, Badmotorfinger established Soundgarden's unique identity in the mainstream, heavy, technically complex, and artistically fearless. This laid the perfect groundwork for their next album, 1994's Superunknown, to debut at #1 and become a global phenomenon. Badmotorfinger didn't just help launch grunge, it paved the way for alternative metal and inspired countless bands to embrace their own natural weirdness. It's the sound of a band hitting their stride, making something as complex as it was crushing, and creating one of the most essential records of the early 90s. By the time Soundgarden had started work on Superunknown in 1993, there was a lot of expectations from their label that this forthcoming album was going to be the group's breakout hit. The label suggested working with producer Michael Beinhorn, whose credits included Red Hot Chili Peppers, Soul Asylum, and Violent Femmes. Up until this point, the band had mostly co-produced their albums along with Pantera producer Terry Date, who didn't really give the band a ton of feedback or suggestions. So the group was initially a little hesitant and very protective of bringing an outsider who was going to make comments on modifying their songs. But Beinhorn jumped at the chance to work with the group, and as a tryout, they recorded 2 songs together. He recalled to The Ringer, "I wasn't sure that we clicked, but somehow, I guess we did." Susan Silver praised Beinhorn, stating, "All of the managers who I've ever spoken to loved working with Michael Beinhorn, as did I. He was just great to deal with in terms of the business end of things, and every musician that's ever worked with him didn't like the experience at all, and they usually come through it with the best records of their career." Beinhorn's reputation for getting the best out of artists and the members of Soundgarden feeling like their next record was going to be their breakout hit made the pairing seem like a perfect match. It was echoed by Metallica manager Cliff Bernstein. Guitarist Kim Thayil had remembered attending a Metallica gig while they were promoting the Black Album, and this was after Badmotorfinger came out as well. Bernstein told the guitarist how Soundgarden's career trajectory was following Metallica's, telling the musician, "The next record you make, the record of your life, and it's through the roof." But things got off to a bit of a rough start with their producer. Chris had sent their producer demo tapes of what he was working on in the mail. So one tape in particular had a dozen or so songs on them. The producer, though, wasn't impressed with what the frontman was coming up with, referring to these compositions as second-rate Soundgarden songs. Their producer told The Ringer, "I realized that we had to have a conversation before we ended up with a record that no one would be particularly happy with." The producer added how Chris felt pressure to write songs in the same vein as what Soundgarden had previously done. But he pushed Chris to write whatever came out of him, reminding him that the band already had a sizable audience who was willing to hear whatever they had to say. He then asked the frontman what music he liked, to which Chris responded, "The Beatles and Cream." And the producer told him, "Okay, go write music that sounds like the Beatles and Cream." It was over the next several weeks. One night, Chris was driving home from Bear Creek Studios, about a 35-40-minute drive from Seattle, and remembered hearing a news story where he thought he heard the reporter use the words "Black Hole Sun." Chris later admitted he most likely misheard what the reporter said, but he thought to himself it was a perfect title for a song. Those 3 words created so many images in his head. And it was an instance of where he had the title before he had any music.
Were you in a room alone when you wrote that song?
I was in a car driving home like at 4 a.m. when I wrote that song.
In your head, like, in other words?
Yeah.
You're driving along,
yeah,
and the tune comes to you in your head?
Yeah, the whole thing, and even the was all in there. And then I raced, I just tried to keep it revolving so I wouldn't forget. Went inside, kind of whistled it into a tape recorder, which I never listened back to. but I just in case I forgot it. And then the next day I kind of wrote out the lyrics, but I had the lyrical idea and everything.
And it all meant something to you, and you heard it in your head. You hear it in your head almost like you're listening to the radio.
Exactly.
He mentioned in a separate interview that he added a couple of key changes in the verse to make the melodies more interesting, adding, "Then I wrote the lyrics, and that was similar, a stream of consciousness based on the feeling I got from the chorus and the title." Chris really loved the combination of two opposites, a black hole and the sun. A black hole being a billion times larger than the sun, a void, a giant circle of nothing, while the sun was a giver of all life. This contrast of bright and dark, hope and underlying moodiness, as he put it. He even compared the song to the Syd Barrett era of Pink Floyd, stating, "There's a happy veneer over something dark. It's not something I can do on purpose, but occasionally it will happen by accident." As Chris put it in another interview, "If I write lyrics that are bleak or dark, it usually makes me feel better." 3 weeks had passed since their producer, Michael Beinhorn, expressed concern over Chris's initial set of songs he had heard. But the producer was on his way back from an open casket funeral of a close relative one day. He got home and he received another demo tape from the Soundgarden frontman, which consisted of 4 songs. The first one was Fell on Black Days, a song which the producer loved. There was another song which had Alice in Chains guitarist Jerry Cantrell playing lead called Anxious, but the producer felt it wasn't appropriate for the album. There was a third song called Tighter and Tighter, which actually ended up on Soundgarden's subsequent album, Down on the Upside. The producer wanted to do the song, but the band opted not to put it out at the time. And then the final song on the demo was Black Hole Sun. The song blew the producer away, recalling how it was one of the best songs he'd ever heard. He remembered, "The best music has periods of tension and release, and Black Hole Sun is almost all tension, but it keeps dragging you along with it." The song transported the producer back to a place of mourning. He ended up ringing up Chris after listening to the song 15 times in a row, remembering, "I told Chris he was a genius." He said, "Huh, really?" That was the moment he knew the band was finally ready to go into the studio and make an album. But Chris still had to play the song for his bandmates, and they weren't all convinced about its potential. Kim in particular told The Ringer, "I didn't orient myself toward radio, and so I may have been a little bit more resistant because it was not necessarily friendly to my style of playing guitar until you get to the solo." Even though the producer loved the song, Chris wasn't convinced of its commercial potential because as the frontman saw it, he never really thought in terms of hits or singles, and he thought the lyrics were too weird to have broad appeal. He thought that maybe once their forthcoming album had been out for a while, the label would issue Black Hole Sun as the final single, something different that was just for the fans. But people's attitude quickly changed once the song was being mixed and mastered. The band's ex-bassist Hiro Yamamoto stopped by Bad Animal Studio in Seattle, where the band was recording at the time, to see the band and listen to the songs they were working on. He heard Black Hole Sun telling the group, "That's your hit right there. That's the song." Even A&M, the band's label, knew Black Hole Sun was going to be a massive hit, but they opted to make it the third single. Now, despite all the signs pointing to a huge hit, the band were a little apprehensive about what releasing a huge single could mean for them. If it was a massive hit where they expected to play the song everywhere they went, they'd worked so hard for their musical identity and didn't want to be known for just one song. Superunknown was issued on March 8th, 1994, almost a month before Kurt Cobain's death. Spoon Man, the first single, was released in February of the same year, peaking at number 3 and 9 on the mainstream rock tracks chart and the alternative airplay chart.
Did you write Spoon Man on your own?
Yeah.
Spoon Man.
The second single, The Day I Tried to Live, came out a few weeks after Cobain's death, and it peaked at number 13 and 25 on the same charts. Then Black Hole Sun, the third single, was issued in May of 94, and the video dropped on MTV 1 month later. The song ended up topping the mainstream rock tracks chart. It was number 2 on the alternative airplay chart and number 9 on the pop airplay chart. Black Hole Sun, meanwhile, received the award for Best Metal Hard Rock Video at the 1994 MTV VMAs, and a Grammy Award for Best Hard Rock Performance, and a nomination for Best Rock Song. Chris mentioned about the award, "I don't know if Black Hole Sun is a metal song, but we'll take it." Well, Chris has kind of given varying explanations about the meaning behind the song. He's largely stated the same thing in interviews. In 1996, he admitted to requests that lyrically it's probably the closest to me just playing with words for words' sake of anything I've written. But he noted it's not a happy song despite the melody being chipper. But if you dig a little deeper, there seems to be Chris's reflections on the music industry, which is full of deceit, backstabbing, and exploitation. One good dissection is that the narrator is tired of humanity and hopes for it to end. The people's smiles in the video hide what's truly underneath, something much darker. Despite Black Hole Sun's massive success, Chris Cornell remarked that his first fear when writing Superunknown didn't end up coming to fruition, telling The Ringer, "Black Hole Sun didn't seem to corner us or create a problem. It provided a moment when a lot of eyes and ears were on us. We didn't have to recreate Black Hole Sun. We never felt that need." The fourth single from Superunknown, My Wave, peaked at number 11 and 18 on the mainstream and alternative airplay charts. The fifth and final single, one of my favorites off the album, Fell on Black Days, peaked at number 4 and 13 on the mainstream rock and alternative airplay charts.
I had this notion of what I wanted to say with the title, and the title probably came first, before I even knew what the words were. But the idea was that this is this universal situation that we all have, where everyone's lives go through periods of good and bad and positive and negative, and I don't think that we can necessarily predict one or the other is going to happen. You might get married and imagine this next several years of bliss, even if you're realistic and you think it might not last forever. And then immediately, somehow you're waking up and realizing that not only is it not like this positive direction, but it's a negative one, and you didn't see it coming, and you couldn't have ever predicted it. And the idea of the song is that the singer is just sort of discovering it. And everything was great, and suddenly it's not, and no one thing happened. There wasn't a car accident. You weren't diagnosed with cancer. Your best friend didn't die. Nothing. You just suddenly realize you're not content and you're not happy. And I just noticed that in everyone I knew, and certainly myself. And so then set about trying to put that in a song. And I think I wrote one or two versions musically, neither of which worked. And I think the band and I wrote one or two versions musically, and I think we liked all of them. But none of them ever ended up being on a record. And then in writing songs for Superunknown, it just kind of happened one day. And it happened, I think, so fast that I don't even really specifically remember. I just remember the notion and then sort of the end result and feeling, oh, finally, this is the song it was supposed to be.
Superunknown went platinum in just 2 weeks. For comparison's sake, Badmotorfinger took 2 years to go gold. The album went on to be certified 6 times platinum in the States. But sadly, Superunknown's success also spelled the beginning of the end for Soundgarden. Drummer Matt Cameron told Greg Prato, "For the most part, it was pretty fun. Then towards the end of that tour, Kurt died, and I think the whole fabric of the group was starting to unravel a bit." Thayil clarified that by this point in the band's career, there really wasn't any interpersonal issues or tensions, but rather it was stressful always being on the road and dealing with emotions without their support system, especially after Kurt Cobain died. He added, "It wasn't fair. We didn't get to drive and be around our family during that period. We were supposed to be on the road, and that's when it sucked. People dying out in the Seattle music scene wasn't supposed to happen." Maybe foreshadowing the upcoming problems the band would face, the last date of the Superunknown tour didn't go well. Thayil told author Greg Prato, "Our last show was at Memorial Stadium in Seattle, a really bad show. Chris's voice was having a really up time. When the show was over, he just walked off stage, got in a car, and took off." As the band turned their attention to their follow-up album, 1996's Down on the Upside, the roles in the group were slowly shifting. The group's then manager and wife of Chris Cornell, Susan Silver, recalled how drummer Matt Cameron tried to take more of a leadership role because Chris became more withdrawn. Kim, meanwhile, was the peacemaker, but the business side of the band was wearing on him, while Ben was pretty explosive. It was Matt's idea to do their next record in a less stressful environment than Superunknown. So with the insistence of Matt, they enlisted Adam Kasper, a friend of theirs who had worked as an assistant engineer on Superunknown. But not everyone was on the same page, and it resulted in the process feeling fractured. While Superunknown and even Down on the Upside went into a more commercial direction, Thayil wasn't really on board wanting to stick with Soundgarden's trademark sound. The band spent a little bit of time doing pre-production before heading to Europe in 1995 and doing some shows that summer with Mudhoney. But Mudhoney guitarist Steve Turner recalled to Greg Prado that it was possibly one of the worst tours he'd been on. He recalled the Soundgarden guys, none of them were talking to each other, everyone angry, it was no fun. The band returned from Europe with Chris writing and demoing songs at his home, while the other members were writing their own stuff to bring to rehearsals. The old days, though, of collaborating on each other's songs were long gone, with Thayil noting how his participation really diminished in the group, as his only contribution to the album was a song Never the Machine Forever. The guitarist added, "At some point, what I thought was pre-production ended up being production. What were demos and pre-production ended up being the thing. There was a big miscommunication in the recording process of Down on the Upside, just in terms of pacing and the tempo, and then all of a sudden the pace really sped up. At one point, Ben and Kim recorded a song with then Seattle Mariners pitcher Randy Johnson, who played drums, but Chris never got around to finishing the vocals on the track, so it just remained unfinished." Adam Kasper, who heard the collaboration with the Mariners pitcher, later remarked how Randy Johnson should probably have stuck to his day job. Really, the death of the band at this point in their career, and as you can probably guess, had to do with communication. They just didn't talk about their problems anymore, and life got more complicated and less enjoyable. Only adding to the problems was that, according to his ex-wife and manager Susan Silver, Chris was dealing with undiagnosed depression and wasn't really doing anything to take care of his mental health. Susan recalled instances of her husband not communicating with her and coming home and curling up on the floor and sobbing. If you couple this with bassist Ben Shepherd, who was depressed and lonely and also had anger issues, and it was a powder keg waiting to explode. Desperate to fix the situation, Susan reached out to Aerosmith's manager to get everyone talking again. He had recommended the book The Paradox of Success that was instrumental in getting Aerosmith back on its feet, but Soundgarden was too far gone by this point, and the idea of group therapy wasn't embraced by everyone. Now, despite these problems, the band somehow managed to cobble together their fifth record, Down on the Upside, that still proved to be a commercial success. It was released in May of 1996. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, going platinum and producing a slew of hits, including Pretty Noose, Bird in My Hand, and Blow Up the Outside World. But it only sold a fraction of what Superunknown did. With a new album out, the band hit the road, and the live shows did little to alleviate their issues. Matt Cameron told Mark Yarm, "The sessions were certainly strained, and once we started touring, the shows were incredibly bad. Just horrible. A lot of drinking, bad vibes, rockstar bull. I was actually thinking about bailing at that point. Ben really couldn't get through an entire show without having some sort of temper tantrum. It was so not about the music." Chris, meanwhile, admitted to the same author how he never drank in the early days of Soundgarden on the road because the band was so important to him, but for Down on the Upside's tour, he admitted, "I was drinking all the time. I was playing shows drunk. I would have a keg cup full of vodka with ice before I walked on stage, and I wasn't aware enough to understand that wasn't good. I wasn't singing as well or playing as well. I had a couple of bad episodes." Then on February 9th, 1997, over an hour into a show in Hawaii, bassist Ben Shepherd, who was upset with some technical issues, slammed down his bass and stormed off stage. While it was long reported that the band broke up at this very moment, they actually didn't. That wouldn't happen until several months later. Now, despite the tour not going well, Matt Cameron expressed some hope that they would record a new album after their disastrous show in Hawaii. In fact, he'd already assembled some song ideas. Then one day after the tour ended, he recalled Chris stopping by his house, which he never did since they didn't hang out a lot. The frontman was reeking of alcohol and came by to tell the drummer that he was leaving the band. Chris soon stopped by the other members' homes to break the same news. Both Matt and Kim actually felt relieved by everything, with Ben probably taking it the hardest. Then several months after their last show, the band finally issued a statement on May 10th, 1997, announcing that they were breaking up. Chris Cornell went on to pursue a solo career, but according to his wife Susan, that did little to alleviate his personal issues. She recalled the creative tension between the band members is what had helped him solidify his belief in his own songs. This resulted in his depression getting worse, and with him self-medicating with pills, it wasn't long after that both Chris and Susan got divorced. As for bassist Ben Shepherd, his fiancée left him around this time. His band was now done, and then his other band he started shortly after Soundgarden broke up, called Hater, also broke up, and Ben ended up injuring 3 of his ribs in a stunt that had gone wrong. He at one point ended up overdosing on liquid morphine and got hooked on Valium.
There was a transition from being an indie band where virtually everything was done based on what the 4 of us decided we wanted to do and how we did it, even to being our own roadies, to then having a periphery of people needing to meet schedules, make decisions. And some of that is just the nature of how things are when your audience expands and you sell more records, and some of it was just the fat of a stupid industry that is now dead because of it. It was more of a day-to-day life becomes less enjoyable.
Apart from Chris Cornell's huge solo career, he also fronted Audioslave with the guys from Rage Against the Machine. Matt Cameron famously took over the drum throne for Pearl Jam. Kim Thayil and Ben Shepherd got into their own different musical projects, and a reunion felt like a total fantasy. Now fast forward 12 years later, and Soundgarden would reunite in 2009. In a strange twist of fate, it was the music business that helped reunite the band. Kim told Revolver, initially we reunited kind of as a partnership concern regarding our legacy. Hey man, we don't have a website. Friends of ours have kids who are in junior high and high school and learning instruments, and these friends were asking us, why can't we find your t-shirts when we go to the store? The irony is that the very business that broke them up was actually responsible for reuniting them. It was these discussions that kickstarted a reunion tour and a comeback album with their latest release, 2012's King Animal. The album hit number 5 on the Billboard 200 chart, and it was clear that their return was no fluke. Soundgarden were back, touring the world, and already talking about the next album. The future looked incredibly bright and loud. It was for the next 5 years, Soundgarden was a monster on stage all over again. They did a massive co-headlining tour with 9 Inch Nails in 2014, and kept writing new music with real plans for a follow-up to King Animal. It was by the spring of 2017 they were back on the road for a headlining tour across the US. On the night of May 17, 2017, the band walked onto stage at the Fox Theater in Detroit. It was a sold-out show. They played a marathon 19-song set that covered their entire career. To his bandmates, Chris Cornell seemed a little tired than when he started, but then his voice just roared to life, and he delivered what they called a super amazing performance. He was full of energy, fist-bumping fans in the front row and telling the Detroit crowd over and over how much he loved him. At one point, he said, "I feel bad for the next city." The last song of the night was a long, thundering version of Slaves and Bulldozers, and he wove in lyrics from Led Zeppelin's In My Time of Dying, eerily foreshadowing what was to come next. Just a few hours later, the dream was over. In the early morning of May 18th, Chris Cornell was found dead in his hotel room. The cause of death was ruled to be self-harm, a finding his family would publicly question, believing prescription medication played a role. The news was an absolute gut punch to his family, his bandmates, and the millions of fans who had looked up to him for decades. The powerful, poetic, and seemingly unbreakable voice of a generation was now gone, and Soundgarden, right in the middle of this incredible second act, was silenced. And in the middle of all this grief, this is where the story gets really ugly. The remaining members of Soundgarden, Kim Thayil, Matt Cameron, and Ben Shepherd, weren't just mourning their friend, they were walking into a legal nightmare that would become painfully public. At the heart of it all, a collection of 7 unreleased demo recordings that Chris had been working on right before he died. This became the center of a brutal war between the band and Chris's widow, Vicky Cornell. In December of 2019, Vicky filed a lawsuit against the band. She claimed the recordings were solely authored by Chris for a solo album and that they belonged only to his estate. She accused the band of holding back hundreds of thousands of dollars in royalties to try and strong-arm her into handing over the vocal tracks. The band fired back hard. They argued the songs were always meant for Soundgarden, stating they'd been collaborating on music with Chris as far back as 2015. and that the members had co-writing credits on 5 of the 7 songs. They said they couldn't even get their own music because Vicky was holding the vocal recordings hostage. The fight just got uglier and more personal from there. The band alleged that Vicky had completely locked them out of Soundgarden's official social media accounts and website, basically seizing control over how they communicated with their own fans. For a while, the band had to launch new social media pages under their old anagram, New Dragons. Vicky's lawyer shot back saying she had created and managed those accounts for years, and that the band was trying to maliciously defame her. The whole thing spiraled. There were lawsuits over buyout offers for Chris's share of the band, which Vicky called viciously low, and fights over money from the 2019 Chris Cornell tribute concert. It turned into this messy public spectacle of accusations and countersuits. And all the while, the final songs Chris ever recorded were locked away completely unheard. After years of this public, painful fight, a breakthrough finally seemed to come in April of 2023. Both sides put out a joint statement saying they had reached an amicable deal. They talked about a new partnership that would finally allow Soundgarden fans around the world to hear the final songs that the band and Chris were working on. The band has made it clear that they won't rush into anything. They want to wait until an entire album is complete to make sure it's proper tribute to Chris and his work. A release in 2026 now seems like a real possibility. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive into Soundgarden's journey from scrappy Seattle newcomers to the architects of a whole new sound. Their story is a reminder that music can spark revolutions, survive heartbreak, and push boundaries in ways that still resonate today. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.